Unit 3 of APUSH, it goes through the period of, I think, 1754 to 1800. So the main topics that are covered in this unit are the stuff that led to the Revolutionary War, and the early years of America. So it starts off with the French and Indian War, which is part of the whole 7 Years' War conflict with France and Britain. But the French and Indian War is settled in North America, and this is because the French and British territories are like starting to rub on each other and starting to create conflict, and they're trying to like fight for the land in the Ohio River Valley, and the Indians just happened to join in because they wanted to like get some authority, and maybe if their side wins, maybe they get some authority and stuff. So they ended up fighting, and the British sent George Washington as the captain or lieutenant, I forgot, to fight, and the colonies ended up winning, and it ultimately resulting in the colonies getting territory all the way to the east of the Mississippi River. But then there are still natives living in that area from the Appalachians to the east of the Mississippi River. So then the British didn't want more conflict with the natives and didn't want like their settlers getting hurt or like paying for like more protection. So they issued the Proclamation of 1763, where they prevented the settlers from expanding westward. But then that kind of triggered the settlers because like they fought for that land, you know. So then they're like, no, I want to go there. But then like to make things worse for the settlers, the British had to like, because it cost a lot of war for that it cost a lot of money for the French and Indian War. So then the British issued more taxes on the colonies, and these were like the Stamp Act, which is for like paper goods, the Sugar Act, which is for like sugar and other edibles, I think. And there's also the Currency Act as well, where the colonies can't produce their own money, and this stuff is used to just like pay to like get Britain out of debt. But this all came at after a period where the British were letting the Americans do their own, or the colonies do their own thing, which is called like salutary neglect. And this is when and this is like part of the whole Navigation Acts thing, which happened like decades before. And this is where like the British said that you can only trade with us, but then they didn't really enforce it. So then the Americans just smuggled goods and all that stuff. Yeah, the Americans didn't really like that. Now there was a bunch of these like taxes and a bunch of this like British control over them. So they asked for so like the colonies gathered together in the First Continental Congress, and they asked for Britain to repeal the Stamp Act, I think, and at this point they still want to be like loyal to Britain, and British people actually Britain actually did repeal the Stamp Act, but they issued I think it was the Declaratory Act, where they could say we could put any law on you just to know that we're still in charge, and they issued like the Townshend Act and like the issuing of like British soldiers, or the quartering of British soldiers. So it's just like more stuff to put onto the colonies, and the colonies are like, no, we don't like this, dude. We've been like doing our own thing for so long, and you're giving us all these taxes without representation. That's where the whole taxation without representation thing came from, and Britain was like, you actually do have representation because we base our representation off of classes, but then in the colonies they base their representation off of location. So like Virginia has their own representation, and New Jersey has their own, and they have like differing views of what representation is. Oh, my bad. I was just looking at my notes just to make sure, and like the soldier quartering came with the Sugar and Stamp Act in that area, and the Townshend Act was on its own. And after the Townshend Act, there was the Boston Massacre, which happened because there was a lot more British soldiers there, and that's when like the British soldiers killed like, well, that's when like there's like some colonial dudes, like guys I think, that were like messing with the British soldiers, and they shot like 5 of them, and yeah, that triggered the colonists even more because they wanted more autonomy, and they also rebelled with like the Boston Tea Party, where they threw a bunch of um, British tea into the water because that was being enforced on them, because they were, prior to this, they were buying Dutch tea, and this angered the British as well, and they issued the Intolerable Acts, where they closed the Boston Harbor, which damaged Boston's economy, and they also enforced more like soldier quartering, and this really triggered the colonists as well. So it's like this back and forth thing of like who could trigger each other the most, and ultimately the like elite in the colonies were starting to want to become independent, and this was mostly founded on Enlightenment ideas like natural rights, and like from John Locke, which is like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the I think it's Rousseau, yeah, the consent of the governed. So that's where the government gets its power from the people, and if the government doesn't do what the people want, then the people have the right to like overturn it. And there's also like checks and balances as well from Montesquieu, which is like it's not just like one section controlling everything. Like there's multiple sections like keeping each other in check. And there's also like the first Great Awakening as well that helped influence this, because like it helped spark fervor for liberty and against tyranny, and it shows like God treats us all equally, and it's not moral to have a tyrannical government. And this was mostly held by the elite, and it will mostly spread to the common people through Thomas Paine's Common Sense, where he used Enlightenment and Great Awakening content to explain the injustices to the masses, and that helped put the colonial thoughts into words, and it helped establish a feeling of a need for independence. And during the Second Continental Congress, that's when they actually signed it, that signed the Declaration of Independence, and well, by Thomas Jefferson. That's how the revolution started, but in reality, most of the, not all of the colonists were actually interested in the revolution. Some were neutral and some were loyalists, which wanted to stay loyal to the British Crown. So there isn't much like unanimous support for independence in the colonies, and not only that, they're facing up against like one of the strongest imperial powers at that time, which is Britain. So not many other nations want to support the U.S. But then, because the U.S. won in the Battle of Saratoga, then France wanted to support the U.S. as well, and they ended up beating the French, and they ended up beating the Britain, and it ended up beating the British in Yorktown. During this time, African Americans were also asked to join the U.S. and the British ranks with the promise of freedom. And after the dub, they ended up with the Paris Peace Treaty, where U.S. Was dubbed an independent nation, and they got land all the way to the Mississippi River, which, then again, they got access to all the land before they probably couldn't. So yeah, they probably got all the land ever since the French and Indian War, but they never actually got to like use it. And this revolution sparked off other revolutions as well, like the French and Haitian ones, because it showed that the U.S. was able to beat one of the most powerful nations at that time, and they were able to fight against like tyranny. and they were able to establish a government based off enlightenment. And they were able to establish a government based off enlightenment and freedom. And in terms of their own like domestic life, because the women were in charge of more things while the men were off to war, the women got more rights. Yeah, the woman got more rights, and slavery was like the woman got more rights in that they got more education, and slavery was put into question as well, because of all this talk about like liberty and equal rights and stuff. So slavery importation was banned, and it was abolished in the North. Now, for the first Constitution of the United States, that's the Articles of Confederation. It's mostly a legislative based, where it's like there was no president, no Supreme Court or anything. It was just mostly like based off the people, which is the type of government they had before, and there's no like central government, so each state was off doing their own thing. But then the thing is, there was no like collective unity. So when like a rebellion showed up, like in this case Shays Rebellion, because the farmers that fought in the Revolutionary War were being taxed a lot, and Daniel Shays, which is one of the farmers that was in debt, he ended up like starting a revolt or rebellion, and it took the but then the Massachusetts militia was able to take care of it, but it showed that there was no like central force to like keep rebellions down. Like there was no like every state was off on their own, and like every state was off to fight for their own, and it showed that there wasn't really that like other rebellions could cause more trouble in the in the United States. And but one thing that so then they came together to try to fix the Articles of Confederation to something new. But one thing that came out of it that was good was that was helpful was the Northwest Ordinance. This is where they allowed they managed the settling into like the Ohio River Valley area, and allowed them to like if they have enough population, if they have enough people in there, they could apply for statehood. And they also abolished slavery there too. So the new Constitution, because the Articles of Confederation was too like there wasn't enough federal power there, the Constitution was based would have like a more federal central approach. And there was like two plans that came from it, which one of them was the Virginia plan, which based I think it's legislature. Yeah, it based legislature off representation off of population, and this favored the big colonies because there's more people there. But then it was countered by the New Jersey plan, which based it off of there's a fixed number of votes per state, and that favored the smaller ones because then they'll have like technically more votes per people, or yeah. But then ultimately they came to a great compromise where there was like two sections of two sections of Congress. One is based off of a fixed number of states, or one has a fixed number for each state. That's the Senate, and the House of Representatives based off of population. And the South was also like thinking of whether or not they could have their slaves count as people, but then they were also but they also like tried to justify that the slaves were property as well. So then the North and the South ultimately settled to have the slave population be counted as 3/5, they counted like the slaves as 3/5 of a person in terms of like population for representation, and that was part of the 3/5 compromise. And they needed 9 out of 13 states to approve ratify the Constitution. But then there were two groups that came out of this: the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists wanted the strong central government, while the Anti-Federalists didn't. And the Federalists were able to win, partly because partly because they had better advertising, and they were able to, and they said that they'll include the Bill of Rights in there as well, which was something that the anti-federalists were concerned about because there was no mention of rights in the actual Constitution. So the Constitution is based off of federalism, which is a sharing of power between the government and the states. So in the Constitution, there's a thing called the Supremacy Clause, which is for the government, and the government can use this clause to tell the states what to do. But and there's like things that it tells the government, and there's like it lists the things that the government can do, like declare war. But anything that's not listed in the Constitution that's given to the government is given to the states. So that's the enumerated powers. And there's also checks and balances in the government with the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And these balance each other out, so neither of them gets like super overpowered. And like the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch approves and enforces the laws, and the judicial branch makes sure that it matches with the Constitution. And in terms of shaping the new republic, there's the two initial political parties, which is the Federalists. This was led by Hamilton, and they wanted a strong central government, and these favored the elite, while the Democratic Republicans, which are technically like the anti-federalists, are led by Jefferson, and they favored the state power, and it favored more of the rural type of people. And another rebellion showed up, the Whiskey Rebellion. This came because the government was taxing whiskey, and whiskey was mostly consumed by poor farmers. And when they were being taxed, they got mad, and they wanted to revolt against them. But then there was a strong U.S. Army that was able to crush it, and it showed that the central government actually worked. And in terms of international affairs, the British people it was rumored that the British were secretly smuggling weapons to the natives in the Ohio River Valley, and the U.S. was able to fight the natives in the Battle of the Fallen Timber, and the U.S. won, and they got more settlement. Now, the British and the France were still they still had like some tensions at this point. So the British were like impressing U.S. sailors that are traveling to France, and John Jay was sent to negotiate that, sent to Britain to negotiate that, which resulted in Jay's Treaty, and this didn't actually stop the British impressment of the U.S. soldiers, but it gave the U.S. more territory that the British had in North America. And Spain was getting a bit antsy about this because Spain wanted to keep their territory in the Americas, and they established the Pinckney Treaty, where they established some more boundaries in America, or in North America, specifically like the 31st parallel. And in terms of French, they were having their French Revolution shortly after the American Revolution. And the U.S. wanted to stay neutral at the time, so they declared the Proclamation of Neutrality. And like the British, the French also seized the American ships that are going to Britain, and John Adams sent negotiators to meet with the French. They were bribed before even starting their negotiations, and this was called the XYZ affair because the French diplomats were labeled as XYZ. And this raged both the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. But then the Federalists issued the Alien and Sedition Acts due to the XYZ affair, and it allowed for the government to imprison or deport any non-citizen, and this was targeted towards the Irish and Scottish people. And public criticizing of the government became illegal, and the Democratic Republicans saw this as like overreach of federal power, and they issued the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, where the states can nullify any power that they see. The states can nullify any law the government passes that they see as unconstitutional. During this time, because it's the Americans are trying to develop a new identity, and in this case, for women, there's this thing called Republican motherhood, where the women were encouraged to get educated, and have an education, so that they're able to raise the next generation well. And this gave more schools for specifically white women. And in terms of like Native women, they originally had like this matrilineal society where it was their tribes were based off of the mother, but because of increased conflicts, um, more diplomats and warriors, which were mostly men, had influence. And in terms of art and architecture, these were mostly based off of Europe, where they had like the classic revival for architecture, and they had like Enlightenment and Romanticism for their art. And some of the main artists were Charles. I don't really. These are really like specific details, but like Charles Wilson Peale and John Trumbull. And for literature, one of the most famous ones is Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard Almanac, where it was where it's phrases of words phrases like I think a penny saved is a penny earned. Like these phrases help shape the American mindset of like industrious and hardworking people. And in terms of religious freedom, there was like the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, where had like the separation of church and state, and no person can be forced to go to church, and no person can like have their, and the government can't control the church, and the government and like the church and people can't pay taxes to the church, and the government can't violate the conscience of an individual worshiper. This was a lot of stuff, man. I don't know. It's my first time just doing this whole teaching thing while speaking to people, while speaking to the camera. And I looked at this a couple of times for my notes, and it didn't really, I don't know. Ultimately, it's supposed to like, the vision solidifies a lot more when it comes from your head. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know if I want to edit this.